The Colorado mountains stood in stillness, their snow-capped peaks catching the first light of the morning sun. A soft autumn breeze whispered across the rocky slopes, the air crisp and pure, untouched by the chaos of the world below. From a distance, the scene was serene, peaceful, a quiet testament to nature's beauty. The camera lingered on the vast expanse, the untouched wilderness sprawling as far as the eye could see. But amidst this tranquility, something was brewing, something the land had no control over. Inside the cockpit of a Cessna 172, Thalia Voss sat alone, her posture unshaken. She was dressed in simple clothes, a gray button-down shirt and black slacks, a sharp contrast to the vast open sky before her. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her sharp cheekbones catching the light as she glanced from the instruments to the horizon. Thalia's expression was calm, almost distant, as if the world outside the small aircraft was of little concern. Her fingers danced lightly over the controls, adjusting her heading with practiced precision. Every movement was deliberate, every glance at the instruments confirming her flawless mastery of the flight. Even though she was navigating through some of the most challenging airspace, there was no sign of stress, no hint of hurry. Her focus remained unwavering, a steady rhythm of professionalism. She was not just any pilot. Thalia had lived through chaos before. She'd flown in places most couldn't even imagine, and yet she had never been as calm as she was right now. The Cessna cut through the air, the clouds drifting lazily by, almost as if the calm of the landscape mirrored her own quiet confidence. However, beneath the surface of her composed demeanor, there was something more, a sense of purpose. The landscape beneath her, the quiet beauty of the Colorado Rockies, was soon to be disrupted. There was a mission at hand, and Thalia knew the stakes better than anyone. Suddenly, the serene atmosphere was broken, not by the wind or the birds, but by the sound of sirens tearing through the air. The calm of Peterson Air Force Base erupted in a cacophony of urgency. Inside the command center, radar operators scrambled to interpret the data flashing across their screens. The unsettling silence was shattered by the words, "Unauthorized aircraft entering restricted airspace," followed by the unmistakable beep of an alarm. At the center of the chaos stood Major Zarek Thorne, his figure rigid with irritation. He paced across the command center, his sharp eyes scanning the radar screen. His hand slammed down on the intercom, issuing orders with military precision. "Scramble interceptors, now," he commanded, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. His mind raced, calculating the flight path of the aircraft. "How far into the restricted zone? 8 miles and closing, sir," came the response. Tension thick in the operator's voice. "Speed, 120 knots. It's heading straight for the western approach corridor." Thorne's jaw clenched as he processed the information. His calm demeanor from moments ago had disappeared, replaced with a growing sense of urgency. "Unacceptable. Get those jets in the air now," he barked, his voice hard with authority. Outside, the sound of roaring engines filled the air as 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons sped down the runway, their afterburners lighting up the early morning sky. The pilots of the F-16s, Lieutenant Lana Adair and her wingman, prepared for what seemed like just another routine intercept. But, as they lifted into the air, Lana couldn't shake the feeling that something about this mission wasn't like the others. There was an undercurrent of something more, something they couldn't yet see. Her F-16 surged forward, the acceleration pressing her back into her seat as she climbed through the clouds. The plane hummed with power, but it was the unknown that filled her thoughts. With every moment, she felt the pressure mounting. They were about to intercept a civilian aircraft, but this mission wasn't just about getting it out of restricted airspace. There was something more at play, something no one on the ground, not even Major Thorne, fully understood yet. In the quiet of the cockpit, Thalia continued to fly, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if she knew what was coming. The world around her seemed to stretch in every direction, yet she remained calm. With each passing second, the tension built. What seemed like an ordinary mission on the surface was quickly becoming anything but. And as the F-16s approached her, Thalia knew the time for peace was over. The calm before the storm was drawing to a close, and as the first F-16 made visual contact, the world shifted. The chase was on. The roar of the F-16 Fighting Falcons filled the sky as Lieutenant Lana Adair and her wingman pushed their aircraft to full throttle, the afterburners lighting up the cold air behind them. The familiar force of acceleration pressed Lana deep into her seat, a sensation she had come to expect, yet still felt each time with intense clarity. The planes tore through the air, cutting a path toward the small Cessna 172, which was maintaining its heading, oblivious to the 2 fighters closing in. Lana adjusted her heading, the controls responsive beneath her fingertips. her mind racing as the aircraft sped toward their target. She glanced at the radar, confirming their interception path. The unease in her chest was building, a knot tightening with every passing second. This wasn't just a routine intercept. This wasn't like anything she had encountered before. A civilian aircraft in restricted airspace wasn't new, but one that refused to comply was something else entirely. The radio crackled in her headset, Major Zarek Thorne's voice piercing the tense silence. Viper 1, this is Control. Proceed with standard protocol. Intercept and identify the civilian aircraft. Force compliance if necessary. Lana's pulse quickened as she acknowledged the order. She had flown hundreds of intercepts before, but never against someone who was actively defying military authority. The civilian pilot's refusal to respond to radio calls only added to the sense of impending danger. Major Thorne's voice came through again, his tone becoming more urgent as the seconds ticked by. Lana, what is your status? She gritted her teeth and made another adjustment to her flight path. Still no response, sir. Maintaining intercept. The two F-16s positioned themselves in a textbook intercept formation, cutting through the air like two predators closing in on prey. Lana's wingman fell into perfect position, mirroring her every move as they closed the gap. But the Cessna, the target, wasn't flinching. It was maintaining its course, its pilot showing no sign of concern. There were no evasive maneuvers, no attempt to break away from the military aircraft. It was almost as if the pilot was inviting the intercept. The more Lana thought about it, the more the situation didn't make sense. There had to be something she was missing. As they reached visual range, Lana could see the pilot in the Cessna. A woman, her expression calm, betraying nothing. Lana felt a sharp pang of confusion mixed with disbelief. This wasn't the kind of response they had been trained for. Most civilians would panic, attempting desperate maneuvers or signaling for help. But this woman, instead, locked eyes with her utterly composed. Lana's stomach twisted in a strange mix of admiration and frustration. What was going on here? The radio crackled again. Major Thorne's voice was sharper now, the tension unmistakable. Lana, repeat the warnings and display weapon status. If she doesn't comply, force her into position. Lana's fingers tightened around the control stick, the weight of the order sinking in. Her heart raced as she maneuvered her F-16 into a more aggressive posture, putting the civilian aircraft in her sights. She repeated the warning, her voice steady despite the nerves beginning to fray at the edges. Civilian aircraft, this is United States Air Force. You have entered restricted airspace and must comply with orders immediately. Failure to comply will result in forced escort. Again, the Cessna did nothing. It didn't change course, didn't even acknowledge the warning. Lana's frustration deepened, but there was something else, something that gnawed at her. The calmness of the pilot, it wasn't normal, and it didn't feel right. She reported again to Thorne, the words clipped. Civilian aircraft not responding. Still no change in heading. Thorne's voice cracked through the headset again, more insistent now. Lana, you are authorized to execute Procedure Charlie. Bring that aircraft into compliance immediately. Display weapon systems if necessary. The words landed heavily on Lana's shoulders. Procedure. Charlie was a last resort, showing force to make the civilian comply. She knew what was at stake, but there was something in her gut telling her that this wasn't just another routine intercept. This was something much bigger. The F-16s closed in, flanking the Cessna on either side, effectively boxing it in. Lana's eyes darted from her instruments to the civilian aircraft, every instinct screaming that this wasn't how it was supposed to be. The Cessna, however, continued its steady course. Lana's breath hitched as she looked back at the aircraft. It was so precise, so unshakable. Every maneuver the Cessna made seemed deliberate, as though the pilot knew exactly what she was doing. Thalia's cool composure was a stark contrast to the tension mounting in Lana's cockpit. She glanced at her wingman, who was equally perplexed, both of them silently acknowledging that they were facing a puzzle they couldn't solve. Then something happened that caught Lana off guard. The Cessna executed a maneuver, a sharp bank to the left, a near-perfect roll that should have been impossible for an ordinary civilian. Pilot! The air was thick with disbelief as Lana's mind raced. This wasn't just some random civilian trying to get past the airspace. This was someone who knew what they were doing, someone with training beyond what Lana had anticipated. Control, this is Viper 1, Lana reported, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and confusion. The civilian aircraft is performing maneuvers. This isn't normal. We have a highly skilled pilot on our hands. Her mind was still trying to process what she had just witnessed, but the puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place. Back in the command center, Major Thorne cursed under his breath. The pieces were coming together in his mind as well. but it was too late. The recognition was there, but not yet fully formed. Lana, however, felt it. She had just stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple airspace violation. As she closed the distance, she realized with a jolt this wasn't a routine intercept. It was a test, and she was part of it. A test that would change everything. The tension in the command center reached a boiling point as Lieutenant Lana Adair reported that the Cessna 172 was executing flight maneuvers that no civilian could possibly perform. Her voice, though professional, betrayed the confusion she was feeling as she watched the small aircraft defy the laws of what was expected from a private plane. Lana's grip on the controls tightened as she relayed the information to Major Thorne, whose voice grew more urgent in response. Back in the command center, Captain Rowan Knox, who had been monitoring the radar, suddenly spoke up with a tone that shifted from routine to something more alarming. "Sir, the transponder signal. It's cycling through frequencies we haven't seen in years." Knox hesitated, double-checking the data. "It's using the old military identification protocol, pre-digital encryption." The words hung in the air, like a thick fog, obscuring the reality of what was just suggested. The command center fell silent as Major Thorne turned to Knox, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell are you saying?" Knox swallowed, visibly uncomfortable as he said, "Sir, I'm saying this might not be just a civilian aircraft. This could be..." The word lingered in the air like a whisper. Red Falcon. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Red Falcon, the name was legendary, whispered only in the darkest corners of military history. Thalia Voss, the pilot who had once flown the most dangerous and classified missions in the world, was presumed dead after a catastrophic mission 15 years ago. Yet here was the evidence: a civilian aircraft performing maneuvers far beyond anything a civilian pilot could execute. And now, this same aircraft was broadcasting signals that had been classified for years. Colonel Eldon Merrick, who had been observing the unfolding events from the back of the command center, stepped forward, his face betraying a mix of confusion and horror. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice low, almost incredulous. Knox quickly explained the anomaly in the transponder's signal. But before he could finish, Merrick cut him off. "That's impossible," he muttered under his breath. "She's been gone for 15 years. We were told she was dead." Thorne, who had been the first to dismiss the theory, now stood frozen. His usual commanding presence faltered for a moment, replaced by an expression of disbelief. He had been in countless missions, seen the worst of the worst. But this was something that didn't fit. He couldn't fathom that someone he thought was long gone could be back, especially not under these circumstances. "This is a joke," Thorne muttered, shaking his head. "We're talking about a ghost. Someone who's been erased from every record." But Merrick wasn't laughing. He had spent years in the trenches, seeing soldiers and pilots come and go. But Thalia Voss Red Falcon was a name that haunted him. He had been her commanding officer, had watched her rise through the ranks, and then vanish without a trace after a mission gone wrong. Merrick's eyes were steely as he met Thorne's gaze. "This isn't a joke. If that's her, we need to shut this operation down now." "Do you understand me?" Thorne still hadn't processed it. He turned back to the radar, his fingers hovering over the controls. He wasn't ready to believe it. Not yet. He wasn't ready to believe that the legend standing before him wasn't just a tale. But the longer the situation dragged on, the more the pieces seemed to fall into place, and the more uncomfortable he became. Knox, sensing the gravity of the situation, hesitated before speaking again. "Sir, the identification system has confirmed the signal. I've cross-referenced it with the old archives. It's her signature pattern. It matches." The room fell into an eerie silence as the confirmation hung in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. The legend of Red Falcon had returned from the dead, and the consequences of that were impossible to predict. What did this mean? Why was she here? Why had she returned now? Of all times, as if summoned by the tension in the air. The door to the command center opened with a quiet swish. Colonel Merrick, his face grim, turned towards the newcomer. The man who entered was older, his gait slower, but his presence was undeniable. General Sylvester Harlow, the highest-ranking officer in the room, stood still for a moment, absorbing the atmosphere. His gaze flicked to the radar screen, and then to the faces of the personnel gathered in the room. "What's going on?" he asked. Thorne, still stunned, finally spoke. "Sir, we've got a situation. That civilian aircraft, it might be Red Falcon. The signal matches her old patterns." Harlow's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something resembling recognition in his gaze. "Is this a joke, Major?" he asked, his voice stern, but not without a hint of disbelief. "No joke, sir," Thorne replied. We have a Cessna performing impossible maneuvers, and a transponder using military encryption protocols that haven't been used in over a decade." Harlow's expression hardened, and he took a step forward, his attention now fully on the radar. "Run it again," he ordered. Knox complied immediately, rerunning the transponder identification. As the system flickered to life, Harlow spoke again, his tone decisive. "Confirm everything. If that is her, we're going to need to call in the experts." The confirmation was undeniable. The signal was indeed that of Red Falcon, the name that haunted so many of them. Harlow turned to Merrick, his gaze cold and calculating. "You knew this was possible, didn't you?" he asked. Merrick's jaw tightened, his voice low. "I suspected, but I didn't think she would come back." His words were heavy with a mix of regret and something deeper, something older. The Red Falcon program was sealed, buried. No one was supposed to know. And now, standing on the precipice of this impossible revelation, Major Thorne realized the magnitude of the situation. His initial dismissal of the idea now seemed foolish. Red Falcon Thalia Voss was not just a part of military history. She was the key to something far larger than anyone had anticipated. The question was, what did she want now? What had brought her back? As the reality of the situation sank in, Thorne finally understood. This wasn't just about an unauthorized aircraft anymore. It was about a legend returning to rewrite history. And the stakes were higher than anyone had ever imagined. The atmosphere in the command center shifted dramatically when General Sylvester Harlow arrived, his presence commanding immediate attention. His expression was unreadable as he surveyed the situation unfolding on the screens before him. The air was thick with uncertainty, but his arrival brought a new weight to the operation. As soon as Harlow entered, he took control, issuing new orders with calm precision. "This is no longer a standard intercept. We're moving into emergency mode. Prepare for a covert operation," he stated firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. The room immediately snapped to attention. Colonel Eldon Merrick, standing at the back, stepped forward, his expression darkened with concern. His eyes locked with Harlow's, his voice steady but laced with anxiety. "Sir, with all due respect, this is not just a tactical mission anymore. We're talking about Red Falcon. Why now? Why has she come back after all these years?" Thalia, seated in a corner, remained an unwavering figure, her gaze cool and calculating. Her appearance hadn't changed. She still exuded the same aura of control and sharp intelligence that had made her a legend in the first place. There was no hint of hesitation in her posture. Thalia had always been the type to act without flinching, and she had long ago come to terms with the gravity of any mission she was entrusted with. As the tension in the room built, Thalia stood, moving toward the center of the command center. Her eyes swept over the personnel around her. Despite the high-stakes situation, there was a quiet confidence in her movements, as if this was just another mission she was prepared to handle. She knew the cost of failure, but she also knew the price of success. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "We don't have time for answers right now," she said calmly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen the consequences of waiting too long. "The situation has escalated. The plan must move forward." Harlow's gaze never wavered from Thalia as he absorbed her words. He was no stranger to high-pressure situations. But the presence of someone like Thalia, someone he thought had disappeared from the world of operations years ago, threw everything into new focus. He nodded slowly, shifting his gaze to Merrick. "Colonel, get the team in motion. We need eyes on the ground, and we need them now." Merrick's eyes were sharp as he processed the orders, his mind racing through contingencies. "Yes, sir," he replied, before quickly directing his subordinates to begin preparations for the operation. The atmosphere in the room became even more charged with urgency. Men and women in uniform scrambled to their posts, their movements precise and swift, as they prepared for what was about to unfold. Thalia turned to the operations table, her mind already working on the next steps. Her calm demeanor never wavered as she began to assess the situation. She had been pulled back into a world she thought she had left behind. But there was no time to dwell on that now. The threat they faced was larger than anything she could have anticipated. But she had no doubt that the mission could succeed. "We need to disrupt their communications," she said, her voice carrying authority. "The infrastructure is their weak point. We take it out. We take them out." The room was a flurry of activity as the team mobilized. Officers moved quickly to gather intelligence, analyzing satellite feeds and security data. The stakes were growing higher with every passing minute, and Thalia knew there was no room for error. Every decision, every move made now would determine the outcome of the mission and the future of national security. The F-16s, once merely part of the response team, now became a central component of the operation. Lana and her wingman had already shown exceptional skill in the air, but now they would have to rely on that same precision and training to support the covert mission on the ground. Thalia's mind flicked through the operations requirements. She knew the plan had to be executed with surgical precision. Any misstep could trigger a global crisis. As the briefing continued, the urgency in the room became palpable. The command center was a hive of focused energy, each individual acutely aware of the responsibility they carried. The operation wasn't just a matter of intercepting an aircraft anymore. It was about preventing a catastrophe of global proportions. The Cessna wasn't just an uncooperative civilian aircraft, it was part of something much larger, something that had been brewing beneath the surface for years, with a sense of resolve that only someone like Thalia could project. She turned to Lieutenant Lana Adair. "Lana," she said, her tone serious but filled with respect, "we're going to need your expertise. Get the team ready for immediate takeoff." Lana nodded, understanding the weight of the request. This wasn't just about flying, it was about safeguarding the future. As the final pieces of the plan were put in place, General Harlow met Thalia's gaze once more. "You're the key to this operation. You've been through this before leading from the front. Do we have everything we need?" Thalia's eyes remained steady. "We do, but the clock is ticking. General, every minute counts." The sense of urgency in her voice pushed the entire room into action. The mission had officially begun, and with Thalia at the helm, they moved forward into the unknown. Every decision, every move now carried the weight of their collective futures. There was no turning back. The calm had shattered. The storm was about to hit. Thalia Voss stood in the center of the briefing room, her calm presence commanding the attention of every officer and soldier around. The room, filled with high-ranking military personnel, seemed to hold its breath as she took charge. There was no hint of hesitation in her posture, no sign of uncertainty despite the enormous responsibility she now carried. In that moment, Thalia became the embodiment of leadership, her eyes scanning the room with a sharpness that left no room for doubt. She had spent years preparing for this moment, watching from the shadows, calculating every move. Now, with the world on the brink, it was time to act. As she began to speak, her voice was steady, yet laced with the intensity of someone who had been through countless operations, both successful and catastrophic. "This is not just a mission," she said, her words cutting through the tension in the room. "This is a global threat. We are facing an operation so well planned, so ingrained, that even now, we don't fully understand the scope of it." Her gaze never faltered as she spoke, each word resonating with the weight of her experience. "Our job is simple: disrupt the operation, neutralize the threat, and ensure the safety of the American people." Lieutenant Lana Adair watched in awe, the weight of Thalia's presence almost overwhelming. Lana had admired Red Falcon for years, but to see her in action was something else entirely. It wasn't just the reputation or the legendary skills, there was a gravity to Thalia's demeanor that made it impossible not to listen, not to follow. The young pilot, still processing the enormity of the situation, couldn't help but wonder how someone could carry such a burden. Thalia's calm was a stark contrast to the rising urgency in the room, and it was in this contrast that Lana truly began to understand the power of leadership. Thalia continued, her words now directing the mission. "We have limited time," she said, pulling up a satellite image on the screen. "The enemies we're facing are embedded in our systems. They've spent years laying the groundwork for this. We'll need precision, timing, and a team that understands the stakes." The room listened in complete silence, the respect for Thalia growing with every word she spoke. She was not just a pilot anymore, she was the key to their survival. As Thalia outlined the plan, the team moved with a shared understanding of the mission's magnitude. She spoke with authority. Every decision, every instruction, calculated to maximize the team's chances of success. There was no wasted energy, no room for doubt. Every action, every maneuver had to be perfect. "We deploy in 2 teams, she said, pointing to the screen. "I'll lead the first team. Lieutenant Adair, you'll take point on the second team. We move swiftly and silently. There's no room for failure." The respect in the room for Thalia was palpable, but so was the fear. Her return from the shadows had unsettled everyone. They were not just dealing with a rogue operation. They were dealing with a living legend, someone whose reputation and legacy had become the stuff of myth. Yet, even as they grappled with the enormity of the situation, they understood one undeniable truth. Thalia Voss was their best and only chance for success. Thalia's eyes met Lana's as she spoke again, her voice lowering but filled with a quiet intensity. "We've trained for moments like this, but nothing will prepare you for what's coming. I need your trust, your focus. We all need to be one step ahead of them." Lana nodded, a mixture of admiration and responsibility flooding her chest. This was no longer just about executing a mission. This was about everything that had come before, everything that had led to this moment. And Thalia was the anchor they all needed. As the briefing continued, Thalia's leadership became even clearer. She wasn't just dictating the plan, she was guiding them, making sure every detail was accounted for. The mission had evolved beyond what anyone had anticipated. And as the hours passed, the sense of urgency became even more pronounced. The military, once confused by her absence, now relied on her with a reverence that spoke volumes about the years she had spent in the shadows. It was clear that, in this room, Thalia was not just a figure of legend, she was the leader who would take them through the storm. The mission plan was laid out in full. Each team member assigned their specific roles. Every move was essential, and every second counted. Thalia, as always, was unyielding in her focus, her mind moving through the intricacies of the plan with the precision of someone who had been through it all before. There was no room for error, no luxury of time. Each decision carried the weight of lives, and Thalia knew this as well as anyone. Yet, there was no sign of fear in her eyes, only determination. Major Thorne, who had once doubted the wisdom of relying on Thalia, now stood in silent respect. He had witnessed her skills in the past, but this was different. She wasn't just a pilot anymore, she was the embodiment of the mission. "We're going to need everything we've got," Thorne muttered to himself, his earlier doubts now replaced with respect for the woman who had stepped into the void. As the final preparations were made, Thalia turned to her team, her face hardening with resolve. "We do this by the book, but we stay flexible. Expect the unexpected. We'll have one shot at this, and we're taking it." Her words were a declaration, not just of intent, but of leadership. Thalia had always been the one to lead from the front, and now, as she prepared to take charge once again, her team knew without a doubt that they were in the hands of someone who would never waver. The stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. The mission was no longer about simple tactics or precision. It was about survival. As Thalia led them into the unknown, there was a deep, almost unspoken understanding among the team. They weren't just following orders. They were following a leader who had earned their respect long before the mission began. The final moments of the mission unfolded with a sense of inevitability. As the operation that had been years in the making now reached its crescendo, Thalia Voss led her team into the heart of the storm, her calm demeanor the cornerstone of their resolve. Once erased from military records, now she stood at the forefront, not just as a pilot, but as the key to averting a national security catastrophe. The stakes had never been higher. The team, fully trusting in her expertise, followed her lead without hesitation. Lieutenant Lana Adair, whose admiration for Thalia had evolved into deep respect, now saw firsthand the depth of Thalia's ability. The mission was not just about neutralizing a threat. It was about preserving the future. Thalia's leadership was a quiet force that carried the weight of responsibility with an unshakable focus. She moved with precision, guiding the team through the complex infiltration of key power stations. The operation was tense, the sense of urgency growing with each passing moment. As they advanced, the full extent of the conspiracy began to unfold before their eyes. Thalia had been right all along. The sabotage wasn't just about disrupting power, it was about creating a chain reaction that could bring down critical infrastructure on a global scale. The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had anticipated. It was no longer about a rogue faction, it was about a well-organized network, years in the making, with fingers deep in the highest levels of government and security. As they breached the final station, the operatives behind the sabotage were confronted. Thalia's team moved with ruthless efficiency, executing the final steps of the plan. The team secured the compromised personnel, and Thalia, leading from the front, made sure the network of sabotage was dismantled completely. The confrontation was intense, but the moment the operatives were apprehended, a wave of relief washed over the team. For a brief moment, the tension that had built up over the past days seemed to dissipate, and the mission was officially a success. Yet, that relief was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming understanding that this was just one battle in a much larger war. In the quiet aftermath, as Thalia stood among her team, watching the detained operatives being escorted away, a sense of unfinished business lingered. Despite the success, there was no moment of celebration, only the silent recognition of what still lay ahead. The global network they had uncovered was vast, and it was clear that stopping the sabotage at the power stations was only the beginning. Thalia had once disappeared into the shadows for her own protection, but now, those same shadows seemed to be pulling her back in. There was no chance for a quiet life, no rest for the weary. Her commitment to the mission, to uncovering the truth, to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, remained unshaken. As Thalia looked out over the horizon, the sun setting behind the mountains, she reflected on the work she had done. There was no sense of finality in her thoughts, only the quiet understanding that the road ahead would be long, fraught with danger, and filled with challenges. The mission was complete, but the larger picture was still unclear. Thalia's mind raced through the intel they had gathered, connecting the dots between the sabotage, the infiltrators, and the higher-ups who had orchestrated it all. Her resolve was clear: she would continue the fight, wherever it took her. There would be no rest, no turning back. Lana Adair approached, her expression one of quiet respect and exhaustion. Thalia didn't turn to look at her, but she could feel the young pilot's presence. Lana had grown throughout the mission, her confidence and trust in Thalia, a testament to the leadership she had. Witnessed firsthand, without a word, Thalia nodded, acknowledging her. The mission had been a success, but it was only the beginning of what was to come. As the team made their way back to base, the weight of the victory settled into each of them. But with it came the unspoken understanding that the true battle was yet to unfold. Thalia's legacy had been a myth, a whisper in the dark corners of military lore. But now, she was back not just to prevent one catastrophe, but to stop the network of conspirators threatening the world. Her path had led her back to the front lines, and there was no doubt in her mind that this would be her new reality. The world was darker than it seemed, and Thalia would spend every day of her life fighting in the shadows to ensure it didn't fall deeper. Thalia's reflection on the mission was one of unwavering commitment. She wasn't done yet. There was still too much to uncover. Her legacy as Red Falcon had never truly ended. The world may have thought her erased, but her work was far from over. And as the team boarded the transport, ready for the next phase, Thalia looked forward, unflinching, knowing that the road ahead was one she had always been destined to walk.